Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we've done a pretty good job saving the A's this year. We've got a 60-29 record, the best record in baseball, as we have just completed the 2037 draft. So we focused last episode on our future, but now at 60-29, with just about 3 weeks left until the trade deadline, it's time to focus on our present and try to position this team as well as possible as we try to win a second consecutive World Series title. And as we start thinking about how we might try to improve this already strong roster before we get to the trade deadline, we mentioned three options we were thinking about at the end of our last episode in the trade market. And appreciate, as always, the Worldwide Scouting Department coming up with some really good recommendations for us to think about. Anxious Jay basically said, I don't think any of these trades are really worthwhile. And the general sentiment, I would say, was tepid about the trades in general. There's certainly one that stands out that was liked by a larger component of the Worldwide Scouting Department. Did talk about potentially moving on from our current closer, Candon Reisinger, to Lelius Arps, currently the closer for the Blue Jays, also a guy who has started for them over the years. The 26-year-old is fragile in terms of his injury proneness, but he is a pretty solid major league pitcher with a 107 ERA plus and an 85 FIP minus over the course of his career. Those numbers have deteriorated, particularly the ERA plus over the course of his career, as was noted in the comments to our last episode. That being said, a 26-year-old whose scouting report has maybe regressed a little bit from when we think he was maxed out, but still looks like a pretty strong major league pitcher. Not necessarily that concerned about the trend in ARPS. I think he's still a pretty talented pitcher. That being said, as we saw in the last episode, or actually you didn't see this, but I just kind of talked about it, the price for ARPS is extremely high compared to the other players that we were talking about. Trying to pick up Mr. ARPS straight up in a trade. Only our top two pitchers, or arguably our top two pitchers, Chase Dora and Jesus Saldana, or the all-star second baseman Alejandro Landin, would get Mr. Arps straight up. The sentiment from the Worldwide Scouting Department was not that great on Arps. Coach 1549 understood kind of trying to bring a better arm on board for our closer than Reisinger, and clearly a better personality than Reisinger. However, Wright Slow, Kevin McDowell, and Hold Door were all pretty negative on the Arps trade. And given the amount that Arps is going to cost us in a deal, I think I'm siding with the majority on this one, who had expressed an opinion that trading for ARPS probably is a little bit expensive for us right now. We also talked about two third basemen as options for us in the last episode. Kind of felt that catcher and third base were the two most obvious positions where we could potentially upgrade the roster, given that we are in win now mode. Didn't spend any time going through the catchers in the last episode, but there has been some good comments in response to the last episode suggesting that catcher was worth investigating. I completely agree with that, and I have investigated the catcher pool. And right now here, the prices for a catcher that would move the needle for us are higher, much higher, in fact, than I'm willing to pay. Possible something may change on that front over the next few weeks. But in the meantime, we're going to turn our attention back to third base. Kobe Mayo, 35-year-old veteran that we could bring on board. Negatives are he's 35, he's fragile physically, and he's making a lot of money, although 40% of that contract has been retained by the Orioles. He's more of a natural first baseman right now, but he can certainly play third with those ratings. He would give us a captain personality class if he took over at third base for us, which would be positive since it would let us move Jason DeCaro, a pitcher, out of forcing him into a starting pitching or a closer role at this point to maintain that captain personality, given that DeCaro's performance hasn't been that great this year, and he's certainly not one of the top 5 starters on our team right now, and he's certainly not our first choice to be potential closer. And positively, Mayo's still got a good home run bat and a good ability to draw walks. He is struggling this year with a 96 WRC plus, batting just 206, OPS barely over 700. But I think that bat could definitely help us. Both Stanley Rosella and Dodo Dude felt that Mayo was a path to consider, given that we are a win-now team. And even though he's off to a slow start this year, this is a player with 429 career home runs, over 1,000 career walks, who was a perennial 30-plus homer guy for most of his career. Certainly has had trouble staying in the lineup in recent years, playing just 122 games in 2035. But even last year, he put up a 119 WRC plus, so still think he's a potential rental bat who could help us upgrade our offense at third base without a major decline in what we're getting defensively. But there's another third baseman available, Anulfo Big Baby Dolan, switch-hitting third baseman, very different than Mayo. He's over a decade younger at 24. He's a switch hitter, normal injury proneness, a little bit better defensively, although his arm not quite as good, and also does bring us that captain personality that we'd like to bring on board. The bat is the question for Big Baby, but at 24 years old, we do think that there's some room for him to continue to improve and make that bat better. But over the course of his major league career, his 95 WRC plus is worse than what Mayo's putting up this year in the worst season of his career. The positives for Dolan: he's young, he's under team control, he's got that captain personality, and he is a guy who could potentially get better. And the other significant positive for Dolan compared to not only Mayo but also Arps is that his price is a bit lower. Now, you can see there's still only 15 or so guys in our organization that we could trade straight up for him. But Dolan is a guy who, if he did happen to develop and improve to the level that our scout thinks his ceiling is, could become a pretty useful third baseman for us for the next 5 or 10 years. And does also, with that captain personality, give us the opportunity to move Mr. DeCaro into a less prominent role. Although most of the support for any of these trades, as I said, was not pound the table, you have to go do this, Dolan certainly attracted the most interest among viewers. DLL first base 14, coach 1549, Kevin McDowell, Avery Shaham, Wyme 943, Peter Hooper, Paul West, Wright Slow, Stanley Rosella, Blade Staff, and Sean Gratton all suggested that if we were going to do a trade, Dolan was probably the one that they would be most interested in. And as I think about this, I think, as I often do, I agree with the Worldwide Scouting Department here. I can't claim right now that Dolan is an obvious upgrade over our current third baseman, Rodney Mesidor. But Mesidor is 3 years older. He's fragile physically. And Mesidor's 90 WRC plus over the course of his 3 years in the majors is actually a little worse than Dolan's. Now, Mesidor does have a much better error rating, although his arm isn't as good. But when I compare these two guys right now, Mesidor we think is a bit better as a contact hitter, a bit better home run power, slightly worse eye, slightly worse gap power. But I think ultimately higher contact, higher home run power. You probably favor Mesidor on the margin, but it's not a huge difference. But when I consider that Dolan is 3 years younger, has basically been a very similar overall productive offensive player over the course of his career, gives us that captain personality, which Mesidor doesn't have, and has the potential to grow into a player whose contact is just as good, with better gap power, better home run power. He's already got the better eye, and he can get his avoid strikeouts potentially close to where Mesidor is. I think it's an interesting option to bring on board. Mesidor also is a guy who actually has options. So if we wanted to really anger Rodney Mesidor and send him down to AAA to kind of round out his defense for us, that's something we could consider doing as well. And if the trade for Dolan was going to be more expensive, I wouldn't do it. Because honestly, this is almost more of a future trade than a trade to make this team much better right now. I think it does make us a little better right now because it allows us to move DeCaro out of a prominent role in the lineup or in the rotation and pitching staff more accurately, while also maintaining a captain personality. And I think that Dolan should put up very similar production to Rodney Mesidor. So I don't think we really lose anything on the field, and I think we gain a bit in the clubhouse. And as we talked about, there is potential that 2 or 3 years from now, Dolan could definitely be better than Mesidor. And Mesidor is also getting close to the point where he's going to start getting more expensive. So ultimately, we're able to do this deal for 4A starter Edgar Ramirez, who we're happy to include. And then we do have to include Nehemiah Mulligan, a guy who has been up and down with the major league club the last couple of years. Love his glove and his defensive personality, his defensive versatility, actually. We also do love his personality. He has a captain personality, which we're obviously bringing on board. But I don't love Mulligan's bat. Put up an 83 WOC plus for us and 54 at-bats this year. And he's also a guy who's in his last option year, so we're not going to have the opportunity to stash him in AAA next season without getting him through waivers, so we could end up losing him for nothing or losing him quite possibly in the Rule 5 this upcoming year if we tried to move him off of the 40-man. So I just think that, and Mulligan is also a year and a half older than Mr. Dolan. So my thought is Dolan probably has a better bat already today and could have a significantly better bat than Mulligan in the future. He's not as good defensively, but he's got a bat that we're willing to play in the majors right now with that captain personality, unlike Mulligan. And Mulligan's a guy that we could lose for nothing this upcoming offseason, or more accurately, at the end of spring training next year if we tried to send him down to AAA. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade, bring Mr. Dolan on board. And even though he wasn't AAA, the players are disappointed to see Mulligan leave, but should get a decent boost from the leadership and the personality of Dolan when we put him onto the 26-man roster. And we did end up sending down Mesidor. Since we picked him up, he's been on the Major League roster and often playing third baseman for us over the past almost exactly 2 years since we picked him up. But when we brought him on board, he was only accomplished at third base. He can play short. We can probably train him to play second base as well. And we can certainly also upgrade him at first base with just a little bit of playing time there. So we want the captain personality in the lineup from Dolan. And we think that at the very least we can hopefully make Mesidor a more versatile defensive player by force starting him at second base and first base over the next couple of months in AAA Las Vegas. He'll likely be back up with us when we get to September call-ups, or if we have injuries between now and then. And we'll see how Anulfo Dolan does for us as our new starting third baseman in the coming weeks. And the other guy we thought about sending down was Steve Allison, who's our utility infielder, although he's started 45 games for us this year. But given that he's already pretty accomplished at playing every infield position and his overall ratings are better than those of Mesidor, felt like it made sense to send Mesidor down for the time being. Take a quick look at team chemistry after these moves. Clubhouse team cohesion and team chemistry is ecstatic. You can see we've got Dolan and DeCaro both with captain roles, but we are going to be moving DeCaro out of that closer role into something less prominent. But we'll still between DeCaro plus Garland, O'Banner, Saldana, Landine, Brailovsky, and Allison have a lot of leaders on the team, which hopefully will help offset Reisinger's potential disruptiveness. He has been pitching better for us recently. Doesn't mean he's going to be with us on August 1st, but for the time being, we're going to continue to monitor the market and continue to see how Reisinger plays for us as well. And we've made it to the All-Star break, continuing to play pretty well at 64-33. Still the best record in baseball, even though we're 5-5 over our last 10. 8 games up on the 2 Texas teams now, the Astros and the Rangers, for first place in the AL West. Juan Ramos, who led the American League last year with 148 ribbies, tied for the league lead in homers with 24, and second with 77 ribbies. Dan Donahue of Houston, a very strong contender for a Triple Crown this year. Pitching-wise, our stopper, who I know many of you would like to see in our rotation, Doug Weiss, 3.8 WAR, has been incredibly productive in that stopper role for us this year. Over in the National League, I did notice that our longtime center fielder, Luis Lara, at the age of 32, leading the National League with 34 stolen bases for the Mets. And Brady Harris, who we traded away last year, midway through the season, leading the league in batter war. Harris, you may remember, we had as a relatively expensive rental for a few years, ended up trading him away. for Chase Dora, who's now one of our top pitchers, about a year ago. And we ended up winning the World Series last year without Harris, and we still have Dora on the team for the next 3.5 years, hopefully. Whereas it would have been pretty hard for us to keep Harris with the $20+ million he's making now. So I think that one has worked out well for us. Take a look at what representation we're going to have in the All-Star game this year. Jesus Saldana, the brilliant rookie, 9-3 with a 1.88 ERA, makes the team, along with Doug Weiss, the brilliant second-year player. So Saldana and Weiss both having prominent roles for us this year with sub-2 ERAs, and both guys with the potential departure of our longtime ace Jackson Ferris maybe this offseason, who we think could have huge roles in our rotation for several years to come, both with their first All-Star nods. Position player-wise, our DH Ramos, we already talked about the offense that he's putting up this season. No surprise to see him on the All-Star team. Second baseman Alejandro Landin, IAFA signing from just over a decade ago, having another big year for us. 317 average, 11 homers and 39 ribbies in just 205 at-bats. He missed a few weeks, but has put up a 151 WRC plus and a 2.7 WAR while he's been healthy. Andy Brailovsky, who for a while seemed to be a guy who might be chasing a potential Triple Crown, has cooled down a bit, but still hitting 312, 15 homers, and 63 ribbies this year. Named to the All-Star team. And last, but certainly not least, the young outfielder Arturo Uresti in his first full season in the majors, hitting 303, 16 doubles, 4 triples, 11 homers, 900 OPS, and a 149 WRC plus with a 3.1 WAR. So even though our franchise player, Jake Ortega, the center fielder, is out for the year with a significant injury, a broken kneecap, we still end up with 6 All-Stars this year, and feeling pretty good that Uresti, the young outfielder, Landin, the second baseman, Saldana, the starting pitcher, and Weiss, the current stopper, who will probably be a future starting pitcher for us, are all homegrown All-Stars to go along with Brailovsky and Ramos, who we've picked up in trades in recent seasons. And in OOTP, you never know when you're going to get a random pop-up that you've never accomplished in that latest version of the game. But just got our first All-Star MVP, the youngster Uresti, playing in his first All-Star game in his first full Major League season. Was the MVP of the Midsummer Classic. And if you were wondering what Uresti did to win the award, went 2 for 3. As the AL won 10-1. So a pretty dominant performance for the American League. Uresti, 2 for 3, 2 runs scored, 3 ribbies, home run. So a pretty nice game from him. Pitching-wise, Saldana got into some action. Looks like they did not have Mr. Weiss pitch for us. Landin got in as a pinch hitter and was 0 for 2 with the ribby. Ramos started, was 0 for 2. And it looks like Mr. Brailovsky, similar to Weiss, did not get in the game. And before we move on, 2 other things wanted to mention. Mike Ramsey, the absolutely brilliant two-way player. Won the home run challenge this year. He topped our guy, Juan Ramos, in the finals. All Ramsey is doing this year is pitching to a 9-7 record with a 3.62 ERA. He's already got a 5 WAR midway through the season, and you could argue that he's fallen off incredibly from what he did a year ago. And he's also got 24 homers and 71 ribbies while hitting almost 300 and putting up another 4.1 WAR as a batter, as Sarique continues on his pursuit of becoming the most legendary player in baseball history. The other thing I wanted to check in on was the All-Star prospects. Several Oakland pitchers in our organization. Mike Blumenshine, you may remember him, was our 20th overall pick a year ago and then only pitched 3 games in rookie ball because of injuries. Started this year again in rookie ball, recently promoted him up to A ball. He has not done particularly well at either level, as you can see, with a 6 ERA in rookie ball and a 7.15 ERA in A ball. But his rating certainly suggests that he's more than ready for those levels. Ernesto Comunez, 8-2 with a 2.27 ERA in A ball this year. So he's been pretty dominant at that level with a 3.5 WAR. He is only 19 years old. We probably will, on August 1st, promote him up to high A ball if it looks like he's ready. Certainly looks like he's more than ready for the California League where he's been dominant. And it looks like he's pretty much ready for the Midwest League as well. So he's a guy who's not going to be 20 years old until next March 13th. And it's not inconceivable that the number 28 prospect in baseball, IAFA signing from 2.5 years ago, could be beginning next year in Double-A. Daniel Blanco, closer of our AAA team, is a guy who we think can be helping us in the majors pretty soon. 9th round pick in 2032, 13 saves and a sub-3 ERA in a relatively small sample size of 18 1/3 innings in AAA for us. Position player-wise, only one Oakland player in the All-Star Prospects game. That's the former first-round pick, Darnell Selvey. Hit 268 with 13 homers and 39 ribbies for us in A-ball. We promoted him to high A-ball a little over a week ago, where he's hitting 333 in his first 27 at-bats. And I'm sure some of you noticed that Gianfrancesco Lamborghini, who we looked at in the draft a few years ago, shortstop in the Royals organization, hitting 378 and 45 at-bats in rookie ball, number 9 prospect in baseball right now, added to the All-Star Prospect Game roster as well. And we didn't play all that well coming out of the All-Star break. Lost 2 out of 3 to the Tigers in Detroit. Only 3 games over the next 5 days, home against the Padres and on the road at Seattle before we get to the trade deadline. So with just 3 games left, we're still 3 games left until the trade deadline. We're still 8 games up on the Astros and the Rangers for the division title. Our .650 winning percentage, still the best in baseball, although the Giants with a 7, or the Padres with a 7-3 record in their last 10 are only 2.5 behind us in the standings. Closest team to us in the American League are the 59-39 Royals, so they're 5 games behind us in the standings. So still feel like we're in a pretty good position to finally get our second AL West title Kind of crazy that we've got 2 World Series championships, but only 1 AL West title over the course of this playthrough. But I'd much prefer 2 World Series championships and 1 division title to 1 World Series championship and 2 division titles. Brailovsky, second in the league in hitting. Ramos, second in ribbies. Take an updated look at the team statistics. Our 65-35 record is 3 worse than expectations, so we've been a bit unlucky, arguably. Our 12-8 record in July with a .600 winning percentage is our worst month of the season thus far. We've slipped to second in the American League in runs scored, but still first or second in almost every major batting category. And we still have the number 1 pitching staff in the American League. And you can see we are first in the majority of pitching categories with a pretty good defensive team as well. So no huge holes to fill, but we're going to take a look at what's on the trade block, and we'll show you that right now. Obviously, we can always trade for someone who's not on the block. Pitching-wise, Juan Alvarado and Jeremy Seabright, a couple of pretty high-end starting pitchers, although their selfish and disruptive personalities aren't necessarily the most attractive things out there. Former starter Chase Burns, also on the market, along with Jamie DeVore, Mason Englert, Andrew Nardi. A lot of familiar names as far as position pitchers. Taking a look at the position players who are on the market. 33-year-old Jackson Chourio, the most prominent name on the market, along with Roman Anthony, Harry Ford. Jason Chourio also. Sergio Estrada. Vlad Guerrero Jr. at the age of 38, former outfielder Darrell Hernandez. So we're going to investigate the options, given that we're a win-now team. If there's a guy who we think can help us win now and the price isn't crazy, we should at least kick the tires. But given that we've got the best pitching staff in the AL, second most runs scored in the AL, best record in baseball, I don't think we need to do anything rash. And just for the fun of it, we checked in on Jackson Chourio, hitting only .224 this year for the Dodgers in 116 at-bats. He's wrecked physically at this point. Still has a pretty impressive skill set, but he's not willing to waive his no-trade clause, even though the Dodgers are trying to shop him. And we've kicked the tires on a few players. Not really anything all that interesting. And again, I guess we could upgrade at catcher, although the 2 catchers we have are excellent defensively, even though they don't hit all that much. The top 2 starting pitchers, Alvarado and Seabright, as we talked about, have some personality quirks, and the only way we could get either of them was to offer the brilliant young starter Mr. Saldana straight up for them, which we're certainly not going to do for a rental. Jackson Jobe, checked in on him. Price was relatively expensive and didn't really view him as a total difference maker to the bullpen. Danny Nutter, kind of the same thing. The price for Nutter was a little bit lower. But although he's a very good arm out of the bullpen, I don't think I'd put him in the closer role over Reisinger, just looking at their tools. Granted, Reisinger still has an ERA in the mid-4s at this point, but I don't think there's anything obvious for us to do. And we have, for those of you who are wondering, checked in on potential catchers who might be an upgrade. Basically, we're looking for catchers who were above average defensively and at least average in all of the primary offensive categories we can search for. There's a decent list out there. Some of them are young and very expensive in trade. Some of them are older, making more money, and in some cases even more expensive in trade. You can see our guy Dave Ackley also makes this list, and Ackley has actually been hitting a little bit better of late. He's got the batting average up to 237. I know that's certainly not exceptional, but with his really good blocking and above average framing and his durability, and the fact that in this month of July he is hitting 362 for us, I think you can certainly argue that the rationale to do something real rash to bring on a catcher that looks a little bit better on paper is probably not all that strong. So I tend to think we're not going to be incredibly active over these last 5 days till we get to the trade deadline. Unfortunately, our new addition at third base, Anutho Dolan, has been in a slump. Basically, since he got here, he's gone cold, hitting just a .184 and 38 at-bats, but 38 at-bats is obviously a very small sample size to make any major projections on. And we've continued to field a lot of trade offers over the last few days. Basically, people want a lot of the prospects in our system for generally older guys or worse prospects in return. So not a ton for us to do there. Unfortunately, we lost the first 2 games of this week against the Padres. Our lead on the Rangers down to 7.5 on to Houston. So we're 4-6 in our last 10. We've lost 3 in a row. So we're not necessarily heading into the trade deadline feeling great about how we're performing on the field. But I mentioned we can get a very good veteran pitcher for Jesus Saldana, who is now leading the American League with a 1.85 ERA as a 22-year-old. I don't think we're going to be dealing him away. We also fortunately signed him to that contract before he had ever pitched for us in the majors, so hopefully he's locked in as a top-notch starter for us for the next decade. But even though we're slumping a bit of late, I don't see anything obvious for us to do. I'm going to continue to check in things offline, see if maybe something shakes loose, but could be a relatively quiet trade deadline for these Oakland A's here in 2037. Not necessarily ideal, given that, as I've talked about, we are trying to win back-to-back titles, but I like our team right now the way it is. And we did unfortunately lose our game against Seattle, so heading back to just before the All-Star break, we've actually lost 7 of 8 games heading into the trade deadline, which we are now past. Hopefully it's just one of those little quirks that happens over the course of the season, with 4 losses in a row, 3-7 record in our last 10, still up 6 on the Rangers and 7 on the Astros in the division. Our .631 winning percentage still puts us 3 games ahead of the Royals for the best record in the American League, although we're only a game ahead of the Padres for the best record in baseball at this point. So perhaps feeling a little bit uncertain about how this team is playing right now. The 4-game losing streak we have is tied for the most in baseball with the last place Rockies and the 4th place Brewers. So that's certainly not great company, but tend to think it's one of those little quirks that happens even to good teams over the course of the season. Still like where we are with this team. Have dipped to 3rd in the league in runs scored, still 1st in the league in runs allowed, and we've actually dropped another game below our Pythagorean record, now 4 games below expectations. With that July swoon, we finished only 1 game over 500 for the month of July, but still banked a winning record when all was said and done, and hopefully we'll be playing better in September and October. And we'll find out how we do over the last couple months of the season in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.